The cold didn't just bite, it hunted. On the Eastern Front, men vanished into snowdrifts that swallowed entire armies. Rifles froze, boots cracked, and breath turned to ice before it could fade. The air itself became an enemy, invisible and merciless. Soldiers learned quickly that bullets were not what killed most. It was the slow, creeping stillness of cold that slipped beneath uniforms and into bones. In that endless white silence, fire could mean death. A single flicker of flame could betray a position to the watching dark. So they shivered, sleepless and hollow-eyed, trapped between frost and fear. Somewhere in that nightmare, someone found an answer. A way to stay warm without light, without smoke, without being seen. No manuals, no orders, just a quiet act of defiance against nature itself. And while history buried most of its miracles beneath the snow, this one survived. A simple, forgotten method that beat the cold better than any sleeping bag ever could. Every instinct told them to build a fire. Fire meant warmth, safety, life. But in the frozen wastelands of war, that same glow turned into a silent executioner. One spark against the dark was enough to summon artillery, snipers, or patrols. The flame that thawed your fingers could end your life before dawn. So men sat in absolute darkness, listening to the wood crack beneath their boots, the world around them colder than thought itself. They learned to fear their own breath, to bury embers beneath snow, to whisper instead of speak. Frost formed on faces like masks, and silence became survival. Nights blurred into endless gray, where the horizon vanished and the stars offered no comfort. Some tore pages from letters to wrap their hands. Some huddled in shell holes, their bodies trembling in unison for heat. Yet even as the cold closed in, a stubborn thought remained. There had to be another way. Something hidden in the very elements that sought to kill them. A secret warmth that left no smoke, no light, only life. It was in that desperation that one forgotten trick was born, a lesson the earth itself seemed to whisper through the snow. At first, they thought the cold came from the air. It sliced through fabric and skin like invisible glass, a constant, merciless wind. But the men who lasted long enough to notice the patterns began to see something stranger. The ground itself was the real thief. Frozen soil drank warmth like a sponge, pulling heat from every inch of flesh that touched it. Sleeping on bare earth was like lying on a slow-burning sheet of ice. Many never woke. Then came observation, the quiet science of survival. They saw how fallen branches rested on snow without melting through, how pine needles stayed dry while boots froze. That was the first clue. Soon, soldiers began layering the earth. Branches, straw, bark, leaves, building a bed of trapped air between their bodies and the frost below. It didn't feel like comfort, but it felt like life. In places where the temperature could kill within hours, these crude, uneven beds turned into miracles. Entire units survived nights that should have ended them. They called it nothing. It was simply what worked. But years later, researchers would rediscover the truth. They had built the perfect insulator. The ground that once killed them had become their quietest ally. They never called it science, yet everything they did obeyed its laws. Beneath the mud and fear, instinct became physics. What those soldiers built was more than a bed. It was a barrier of air. Each layer of pine needles or straw trapped warmth between pockets of stillness, slowing the escape of body heat into the frozen ground. The same principle would one day guide engineers, designing cold weather, tents and sleeping systems, but back then it was born from desperation, not design. They learned to read nature's language, the way smoke rose in slow spirals. When air was dense, how frost formed only where surfaces met the open sky. Every mistake carved a lesson. Burn a fire too high and the snow collapses. Lie too still and the frost creeps closer. So they balanced between motion and stillness, between freezing and being found. Survival became a rhythm. Listen, adapt, endure. When historians later studied field reports, they found few words about warmth or comfort. Yet traces lingered in the margins. Used pine bedding, ground layered with straw, men rested, survived. They didn't know it, but their crude solutions rewrote the physics of endurance. In a war of steel and fire, their greatest weapon was understanding. They weren't scientists or inventors, just men trying to see another sunrise. Farmers from Poland, shepherds from Italy, lumbermen from Finland. They carried their knowledge not in books, but in calloused hands and quiet memory. A man who once stacked hay against a winter storm knew how to trap air, without thinking about it. Another who slept in barns as a boy understood that straw meant warmth. On the front lines, these memories resurfaced like instincts. One soldier showed another how to layer bark under canvas. Word spread in whispers, through gestures, through imitation. A new kind of communication, born not of orders, but of trust. The warmth they shared wasn't just physical, it was communal. They survived because they adapted together. When one found a way, others followed. In a place where rank meant little and nature cared for none, ingenuity became the last form of equality. No one recorded their names. No medals were given for sleeping through the cold. But every man who lived through a night that should have killed him became part of a quiet brotherhood, the forgotten, engineers of warmth, whose brilliance came not from invention, but from remembering what the earth had always known. When the guns finally fell silent, most of those men went home and never spoke of what they'd learned. The war had ended, but the knowledge lingered, in fragments, in habits, in the instincts of anyone who'd slept close to the earth. Decades later, explorers in the Arctic and climbers on Himalayan slopes began to rediscover the same principle: insulation beneath, not above, determined survival. Mountaineers tested it by layering pine boughs or foam mats under sleeping bags and watched temperatures inside rise faster than any high-tech material alone could manage. Modern military trainers now teach the same rule those frostbitten soldiers once whispered by candlelight. The ground steals heat faster than the air ever will. What was once an improvised act of defiance has become standard wisdom in survival schools across the world. But the deeper legacy lies in the lesson itself, that endurance doesn't come from invention, but from attention. Those soldiers didn't create new science. They listened to the old one written in wind, bark, and soil. The trick that outlived the war wasn't a method. It was a mindset. To survive, observe, to endure, adapt, and to understand that even the coldest ground can teach the warmest truths. The war ended, but the cold never left. It waits in every mountain pass, every winter field, every lonely place where a human heart beats against the elements. What those soldiers discovered was never just about survival, it was about awareness. They learned that warmth isn't something you buy, build, or borrow. It's something you make through understanding. The same lesson still speaks quietly to anyone who dares the wild. The earth gives back only what you respect. We surround ourselves now with gear, sensors, and synthetic walls against discomfort. Yet the simplest wisdom remains untouched. Insulate from below. Move with the rhythm of the world, not against it. Those men didn't fight the cold. They learned its patterns, mirrored its patience, and turned it into a teacher. Every time a camper lays a mat beneath their sleeping bag, or a hiker layers leaves beneath a tarp, a fragment of that old knowledge endures. It's proof that progress doesn't always mean invention. Sometimes it means remembering. The frost will always come, the dark will always fall, but the human spirit has one timeless answer: adapt, listen, and find warmth where no one thinks to look.